Good afternoon, and welcome back to the CHS Open House. We are midway through our department talks this afternoon, and right now we are going to go into our session on philosophy. Together with me and with all of us, we have Assistant Professor Zachary Barnett, as well as Associate Professor Michael Pelzer. So thank you both very much for being here and for speaking to all the people who are attending. So before we get into the presentation and into philosophy and their presentation called Masterclass Evidence and Promise Making, we are going to be taking some questions, and we're going to be doing that through the Q&A tab. So on your screens, you should have a Q&A tab. You can click on it, and from there you can ask your questions. You can view other questions that have been asked already and like them if so that we know which are the most burning questions that have to be answered. And then at the end, we can go through the questions together. So feel free to ask, as the presentation is going along, and then we can get to them at the end. Yeah, so for now, I will now pass the time to the two profs. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark. Before you go, can I ask, is it possible for students to send private messages to me? Because what we're going to be doing is there's going to be a little bit of a mini lesson to give people like a little bit of a flavor for what taking a philosophy class at NUS might be like. And during that, I was kind of hoping that students might be able to send me private messages if they didn't want to post them publicly.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure actually. Amy or
yeah, maybe if any of the students who are here can you send me a private message, or is it not possible?
Unfortunately, I don't think that's possible. I have allowed them to talk, but I think the PM function is not available.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, great. So, Prof. Pelzer, do you want to introduce yourself before I sort of like launch into this?
Hi, I'm Mike Pelzer. I've been here at NUS for almost 20 years now. So I work mainly in topics like the philosophy of mind and metaphysics, which probably don't even know what those are, but let's just hear what Zach has to say.
Sure, thanks. So I guess I would like to get a sense from people. So how many of you, whether it's in junior college, poly, or whatever experience you have, how many of you have had some exposure to philosophy before? Say yes or no using the reactions. Does it let you react? There's a hand. Can you do yes or no, or is it only hands? Only hands. Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's say raise your hand if you have had some exposure to philosophy. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, 10. How many people now raise your hand? Now put your hands down. And raise your hand if you have not had any exposure to philosophy. Now, I myself did not have any exposure to philosophy before I came to university. I didn't even really know what it was. So totally fine if you have not. How many people have not? Okay, about 9. So about half and half. So what I wanted to do was to give you a bit of a sense of what philosophy is and what taking a philosophy class at NUS would be like. And so let me share my screen here. Okay. All right. So, what is philosophy? And yeah, feel free to use the chat at any point. Oh, you can't see anything? Mike, can you see my screen?
Well, it just says loading. I'm pretty sure it's not what you intend us to see.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Now we're starting to get a little bit of something here. It says
No, but it's not what you intend. Okay, just
It says click to, it's not, we're not seeing any sort of real content here.
all right. I don't know why that would be, but let's try it again. Okay, how about now?
Yes. At least I
Okay,
can.
now the question is, when I click present, will it actually, how about now?
No.
It might be that the panelist system, maybe sharing works differently. I'm not sure, but we need to get it working before we get started. I have some other ideas for ways they can get this to work, but absolutely have to have it. So let's try it again. Let's now optimize. Okay, you see this at least?
Yeah.
And then when I actually go into presentation mode, then it, all right, wait, what about now?
Yeah, see that? Yeah, yeah.
So if I click this, it should be the same. Nope, no good.
No, it just says it's loading.
How about now?
Well, now it says click to exit full screen.
Well, that's what I see. That's exactly what I see.
Oh, okay, wait, this is looking more promising. Can you go to, but we still have to have a black rectangle.
I am completely puzzled. I don't know why it works differently on this kind of mode. I've not used it before.
Do you have all the
relevant?
relevant forms of access? Can anybody answer that question?
I think I do. I think it's just, there's some sort of glitch. It might be if I use Chrome instead of Safari, that might work. I also can try on my iPad. So we'll just get it.
Do we want to let you kind of try one of those things? Because it seems like this is kind of important.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to say anything about your experience in the philosophy department while I get this working?
Sure, yeah. Well, first off, it's I mean, why should you believe me? Okay, but I'm just going to tell you what I think is the truth about our department, which is that it's a great department. It's a great department for the people who work in it, and it's a great department for the students who take classes in philosophy. I think that includes not just the majors, but I think that everybody, almost everybody, who takes a philosophy module goes away sort of happy with the decision to have done so. So we're not a really big department. I guess we're sort of on the small to medium size in terms of teaching staff. I guess all in we don't even have 20 people. But we have a really kind of tight knit department and good relations with the students too. So when you take as is normal for any department, when you take sort of like the more entry level modules, they tend to be larger. Like I teach our intro module. It's called Life, the Universe, and Everything. A title I just stole from Douglas Adams. But that one has almost 500 students in it. So there you don't get a whole lot of one-on-one time with your lecturer. But quickly as you advance up through say second year modules, third year modules, the class sizes get much smaller. And so by the time you're taking say maybe your second or third philosophy module, you might be in a class with 20 students. If you take an honors seminar, if you go that far with it, it might be single digits. And so you really do get a lot of attention in the department. And also we pride ourselves on the quality of our instruction, of our teaching. We really emphasize it. People come here and one of the main things we're asking before we hire somebody, invite somebody to join the department, is how good a teacher is this person. So we take that really seriously. And I think it shows. I mean, we get our instructors routinely get really, really strong evaluations and positive feedback from our students. Are you ready to go?
Let me just, I'm just going to do it in non-presentation view because this is just ridiculous. Not sure why it would not work, but in any case, something that the students here could take note of is when you take classes at NUS, things don't always necessarily work perfectly. And that's probably true at any university in the entire world. And you're getting to see it firsthand right here. So let me share my screen. So you can all see this, yeah? Okay, so in philosophy, we study some of the biggest, deepest questions you can ask. So what is a good life? Is happiness all that matters? Are there objective facts about morality? Do we have free will? What is consciousness and how can it exist in the universe? That's something that Prof. Pelzar has thought a lot about. Is math a discovery or an invention? Is science objective? What is knowledge? What is rationality? And is there a God? Is there an afterlife? And I've included this little XKCD comic to maybe give you a little bit of a flavor for how others view philosophy. But I thought that the best way to get a feel for philosophy isn't really to talk in general about the kinds of questions we think about, but to sort of go a little bit deeper and to look at a specific example. And so I thought we would look at an ethical question that we discussed in one of my philosophy modules. And it has to do with something called promising against the odds. You can all see my little speaker notes here, so that's fun. So I was going to ask if anyone here would be willing to read out loud this scenario. And I'm not going to ask Prof. Pelzar to do it. So I'm hoping that someone will raise their hand, but if not, then I'm happy to do it. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead. So the scenario is this. It's a case of addiction. So Alexis regularly smokes cigarettes. She would like to break this habit, but so far she has been unable to quit. After a conversation with Junbo, her significant other, Alexis decides to take action. She promises to herself and to Junbo that she will not smoke cigarettes anymore, not even one. Alexis has also studied nicotine addiction extensively, and she knows that most people who sincerely promise to quit smoking cigarettes do not succeed on their first attempt. Given this, should Alexis believe that she will be the exception? She realizes that most people who sincerely promise to quit don't quit. Should she believe that it's going to be different in her case? And if not, if she's not entitled to believe that she'll be the exception, is she really justified in making the promise to herself and to Junbo against the odds? So what do you think? Let's do a show of hands. How many people would raise their hand and say, yes, I think Alexis is justified in making this promise? Go ahead and raise your hand if you think yes. Okay. All right, you can put your hands down. And now raise your hand if you'd say no. It's about 8 people raised their hands. So now what if you'd say no? She's not justified in making this promise, given what she knows about her chances of quitting. About the same. So if you feel bold enough, feel free to put your reasoning in the chat. You don't have to do that, of course, but I'd be interested in knowing why. Why, if you said yes, she's entitled to make this promise, why is she entitled to make this promise? Do you think she's entitled to believe that she'll be the exception to the rule? And if you said no, why don't you think she's entitled to make this promise?
Hi, Prof. Can I answer just?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name
So
is Alex.
what's your name? What's your name?
My name is Alex.
Alex. Hi.
I feel that she.
I feel
that she should be justified in making a promise against the odds, because I feel that even if she knows that most people who sincerely promise to quit will not succeed, she owes it to herself and Junbo to give her best shot and make her promise work. So I think she is justified in thinking that she can be the exception.
Interesting. So you're thinking, tell me if this is kind of one way of saying what your thought is here. Your thought is like, it's something she really wants. Maybe it's something her partner wants as well.
Yeah.
And so given that she really wants to give herself the best chance of quitting that she can, maybe she thinks that if she makes the promise, it'll like make it more likely that she'll succeed because she's sort of committed to it.
Yeah, I think the commitment is what makes her more justified making the promise.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think that that's an interesting way of explaining why she might be justified. It's like it's the thing that would give her the best chance is to actually make the commitment. And we can imagine that even if her chances of quitting overall are maybe around 50% or 40% or something, maybe if she doesn't make the promise, then the chances would be much lower.
Yes.
So you might think that the promise is like a way of making it more likely that she'll succeed. A few people have also given some other suggestions in the chat. But I'm gonna focus on Alex's suggestion for a moment. And we're going to look at some other examples, which might cause you to have different views. But just to put some pressure on your suggestion, Alex, which is it's a very insightful suggestion. One way to put pressure on it is to think about another case. So suppose that my friend needs a ride from the airport. Maybe not right now with all the restrictions and everything, but in a time when we're not so worried about COVID, my friend is going to be arriving at the airport and they need a ride. And I promised to pick them up in a BMW. The problem is I don't have a BMW and I don't have any car. But if I make this promise, then maybe I'll try my hardest to like win the lottery and get a BMW. And like maybe my chances of like picking my friend up from the airport are higher if I make the promise, but they're still not very high overall. You might think like, no, Prof. Zach, you can't make this promise to pick someone up with a BMW if like you don't have a BMW and you don't have reason to think that you'll have a BMW when the person arrives. And so even though I'm sort of like making this commitment and maybe I'll try to win the lottery, I'm like, oh geez, I promised my friend I have to pick them up in a BMW. Now I have to try to get a BMW. You might think, okay, that will like raise your chances of accomplishing this objective, but it's not a promise you should make because you don't have reason to think that you'll succeed. Now you might, of course, there's going to be differences between that case, which I just made up, and the case involving addiction. But I guess the question for you, Alex, is when you really think about that principle as you apply it to many situations.
It's complicated.
Yeah, do you think it will be a principle that always holds, that you can always make a promise if it raises your chances of success?
I felt that the difference between the example you came with and the example of the addiction was getting a BMW is something quite external. You don't really have much of a control over being able to get the BMW within that period of time. But I felt that since addiction is more psychological and it's something that's internal, I feel that making up a mindset would help you strengthen your resolve to allow you to have the strength to quit. And so making a promise here in this case would be justified. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion as well. And Alex, I think you have a lot of birds around you or something. So I kind of like it when you're talking. It's kind of adds a nice atmosphere, but yeah. Yeah, the idea that maybe it's justified to make a promise of the type that Alexis made, because in a certain sense, you might think she has control over whether she quits. At the same time, you know, you might worry that addiction is one of those things. Do you really have control? Like, isn't it possible that you might try your very hardest to quit and the addiction might be so strong that, you know, even when you try your best, you can't necessarily succeed. And so the question of what counts as a situation in which you have control is a really difficult question. And you can think of other cases. Suppose you're someone who has angry outbursts a lot of the time and you promise not to have another angry outburst. Is that something you can really promise? Can you control whether you have an angry outburst? Or is it something that's like a reflex? It just kind of happens. Or if you're, maybe some of you in this room can relate to procrastination. You know, if you promise not to procrastinate next time, is that something you can control? Or is it sort of just a kind of habit? Let's continue on so that we, So here are two potential reactions to the case of Alexis, and these sort of mirror the reactions that some of you in the class had. So one view is the sort of negative view. It said, no promising against the odds. Alexis is not justified. And in general, you shouldn't make a promise when your best guess is that you will not be able to follow through. You might think that's the situation Alexis is in. And so you might think, instead of promising to quit smoking, you know, building on your point, Alex, maybe she doesn't really have control over whether she succeeds. Maybe she really only has control over whether she tries. And so you might think Alexis should promise to try her best. And a different reaction, this is reaction some of you in the chat seem to be having, is that sincerely promising against the odds is okay. Alexis is justified. Even if Alexis's best guess is that she will fail, she can still be justified as long as she sincerely intends never to smoke again. Of course, if she fails to keep her promise, then she might be to blame for failing. But the promise itself, we're not asking whether, you know, we haven't gotten to the question of whether she succeeded or failed yet. We're just evaluating the promise itself before we know whether she succeeds or fails. And so on this view, the promise itself is justified as long as she is sincere. So let's go ahead and take another show of hands now that we've had the chance to talk a bit more and see if people are still in the same camp or if they're undecided. So how many people are in favor of no promising against the odds? You should only promise to try. 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Oh, do we have a majority? Looks like we have 16 of 29. So more than half of you think that you shouldn't promise to succeed, you should promise to try. Okay, hands down. And how many people favor this view, that sincerely promising against the odds is justified as long as you sincerely mean that you'll succeed? Interesting. 5. So still a handful of you. But right now, it seems like more people are leaning toward no promising against the odds. Okay, interesting. Well, we're gonna continue on, and what we're gonna see is we're gonna actually see a case that puts pressure on this kind of view. So many of you who are saying no promising, and that includes you, Prof. Pelzar, we're gonna see some cases where that view maybe doesn't look so good. And Prof. Pelzar makes an argument in the chat against promising, which you can take a look at. And it seems like he's making an analogy between promising that you'll roll a 6 with a die and promising to quit smoking. It seems like, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting example, Prof. You it seems like you would not be justified in promising that you'll roll a 6, even if you really intend to. And so why is it any better to say, I promise that I'll succeed in quitting? And I think maybe Alex's point about control is relevant here. Let's look at some additional examples. Let's see, can I get a volunteer? Anyone want to pick one of these and read it? If you raise your hand, I'll let you choose which one, and I'll read the other 2. I also like hearing the sound of my own voice, so I can read all 3. I'm going to read the first one. Okay, so this is a little bit related to your question, Prof. Shoot. Okay. Jasmine plays badminton. Tomorrow, she will play an important match against a rival. The last time Jasmine competed with this opponent, Jasmine lost narrowly. Before the match, Jasmine is meeting with some of her fans. She's feeling very confident and sincerely promises to them that she will win her match. Is she justified? So that's one case. Okay, feeling lucky. This is a case that I gave earlier. So Zach's friend Luann will soon arrive in Singapore. Before she does, Zach promises to pick her up from Changi Airport in a BMW, which Luann is excited about. The only problem is Zach does not have a BMW. What he has is a lottery ticket, and his sincere hope is that he will win the lottery tomorrow, which will enable him to purchase the BMW, which he can use to pick up his friend. Is Zach's promise justified? Oops. Finally, I'm just going to continue. This is a long distance relationship example. So Jessica and Gerald are in a committed relationship. Due to unfortunate circumstances, they learn that they will have to spend more than 2 years apart without seeing each other at all. Though they know that it will be difficult, they promise to be faithful to each other while they are separated. And the question is, how do these examples interact with the principles that we were considering earlier? Which are these? And so, you can think about, many of you raised your hand and took a side. How do those views fare with respect to these cases?
Hi, Professor.
Hi.
And my name is Yiting.
Hi, Yiting.
Yeah, okay. So I think that if it's something that you can control, then you are justified to make the promise. But if something that you can't control, then that's totally not justified. Like, for example, in the badminton case, Jasmine can't control what the outcome will be because she can't decide how well her opponent will play. And so she can't really have a control over whether she'll win or not. And so in this case, she's not justified to make a promise to her fans. And considering that she has so many fans, that's even you shouldn't do that. Whereas for the long distance relationship, because it's only between 2 stakeholders, so if Jessica and Gerald both can control their feelings and not develop some other feelings for some other people, then in this case it's justified. So it's based more on whether you can control the circumstances or you can't control the circumstances. If you can control, then it's justified to make a promise, but if you can't, then you shouldn't. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yes, so this goes back to the pesky issue of control. And what Yiting has proposed is that control is sort of the essential issue. And so if it's a case where you have control over what you're promising to do, then you're justified as long as you're sincere, even if you know that many people fail. But if it's something you don't have control over, then you're absolutely not justified in making the promise, even if you sincerely believe that you'll succeed. Let's see, I think there might be a comment. Yeah, so Ray points out, can we the issue of free will might be relevant here, and then that could affect, do we have control over anything we do? But let's imagine that we do have control over some things we do. And if that's the case, is Yiting's idea going to really like help us solve this question? Now, often what I like to do in a class is I sort of like to get students arguing with one another, but this is a setting where we don't necessarily have huge amounts of time, and I want to make sure I get a chance to take your questions about philosophy. So I'll say one way of pushing back against Yiting's excellent proposal, and then we'll just consider one final case. So Yiting, with your idea, so what about the case of like the person who promises not to lash out at people in an angry outburst? Would you see that as a case where like you do have control? Or maybe would that be a case of the gray area? I mean, I'm not sure. And it's a hard question. I mean, there may not be one sort of decisive answer that.
Yeah, you do have control because, yeah.
So you would say, yes, you have control over whether you lash out at someone.
Yes, because it's your personal choice whether you want to be angry or not, even if you can't control whether the other people will make you angry.
Yeah, I think that's a natural viewpoint. Now, so I'm going to like make an analogy here, and I'll see what you think of the analogy. So in badminton, there's an opponent, so you can control how well you play, but you can't control how well they play. And because that you only had partial control, in that case, you were thinking, yeah, partial control is not enough. You have to have full control. Now, in the issue of an angry outburst, suppose my little sister is like really good at like provoking me, and she's trying to get me to lash out at her so that I get grounded and I get in trouble. And so in a way, it's sort of like a badminton match. She's trying to get me to like, lash out at her, and I'm trying to like keep my cool. And I can control how well I sort of manage my emotions, but she can control sort of how well she kind of like prods me and like tries to make me annoyed. And so you might think that like in this example, it's kind of similar to the badminton case. There's sort of two people and they're competing, and I can control my part and she can control her part. Do you think this is analogous, or would you say that there's a difference between this case and the badminton?
Professor, I still think there's a difference between the two cases, between the badminton and the sister making you angry. Because how do I explain this? You can't the similarity is that in both cases there's two stakeholders present, but there's still a fundamental difference in the sense that how do I explain this? Like, you can control how well you play, but then how well you play is not dependent on how well your opponent play. Whereas in the sister case, you can control your emotions, but yeah, I think I'm just getting myself confused. Oh no.
No, I think what you're saying, is making a lot of sense. I mean, I guess we can take a show of hands. I bet more people, maybe it'll be split, but I would imagine a lot of people are on your side. How many people think that the badminton case is analogous to the sister? My sister making, how many people think there is a good analogy there? Wait, let me just.
Okay, sure.
And how many people feel like there's an important difference between the two cases? So it seemed like there were 6 people who thought they were the same. And maybe 4 people who think there's difference. So I think there's definitely a split here. I myself kind of I'm wondering whether there might be an important difference between the two cases actually. But go ahead. Was that Alex again?
Yes,
Alex. Go right ahead.
So I felt that to add on to Yiting's point, the difference between playing badminton and controlling your temper is one is against another person and an external situation, where another, which is in the case of managing your anger, is got to do with your internal locus of control. So even though your sister can do everything to provoke you, it might sound simple, but in a sense, you still have control over whether you choose to lash out and break your promise. But then when you're playing badminton against someone else, you are involving yourself in a situation where you do not have really full control over. In the case of lashing out, you might tend to lash out more because of how you just instinctively, going to lash out at someone who provokes you. But then this, I think, would have a greater amount of control compared to badminton, which then makes the two situations different.
Yes, thanks for clarifying. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great suggestion, and I think you all make a good point. Let me try one more. And what a professor in a philosophy class is often going to try to do is to try to poke holes as best we can in whatever ideas you put forward, and in whatever ideas we put forward. So
I have a case too, Zach. If after you're done.
Oh, sure. Well, why don't I have one that I want to try, but I'd like to hear from yours first.
Oh, I was wondering what happens if we raise the stakes. Like, you're at the beach or something. You're at the swimming pool with a friend, and your friend is maybe not a very strong swimmer or prone to cramps or something. And you say, it's okay, go for a swim. I promise that if you start having trouble, I'll come in and pull you out of the water. But suppose that I have like a really deeply ingrained phobia of water. And so I've never been able to force myself to go into the water. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I used to be able to, I was a good swimmer, but then I had some traumatic experience with a shark or something, I don't know, whatever. And so I had this phobia, and ever since I've never been able to force myself to go into the water. So would it be okay for me to make this promise that, oh yeah, go for a swim, and if you cramp up, never mind, I won't let you drown. So my intuition here is that it would not be okay for me to make that promise, even though it's still just, in a sense, it's up to me. It's a psychological thing. You might say I could always sort of like maybe muster the energy to overcome my phobia. So I wonder what people think about that.
Really, yeah, that's a good example, and it's similar to the one I was going to propose. What are there's two of you are doing an excellent job of sticking up on behalf of the control view. What do you think about this? What do you think about this example of saving the drowning friend, promising to save the drowning friend?
Hi, Prof. Can I offer my 2 cents?
Sure, you can.
I think most importantly, it's the examination.
Say, what's your name is?
I'm Ken Hui.
Hui.
Yeah. So I think more importantly, I would want to examine the moral hazards or the implications behind the promise made. So in the smoking case, there isn't a huge moral implication or like a consequence behind like Alexis being unable to quit smoking. Whereas a lot of times in, let's say, like the swimming case, for example, that's a matter of life and death. So there is a huge moral implication behind that. So I think the larger the moral implication of that promise, if it goes unfulfilled, I think the less justifiable it becomes. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And so you would say the badminton promise is actually more morally appropriate than the swimming promise? Because there's less.
This can go both ways because it really depends on how the fans react. Because if Jasmine happens to lose, some fans might react in a way that's like, oh, Jasmine's a liar. She promised us that she would win, blah, blah, blah. And that, in a way, can be considered as a pretty significant moral implication. So I think for the badminton case, it's really a gray area kind of like promise. I personally wouldn't do it. And I can see why, yeah, some people might argue that her promise is or isn't justified. Like on both ends, I can see the justification. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the stakes might affect our intuitions about these cases. And that definitely seems like a good point. All right, we're running low on time. So if it were a class, we would probably continue going deep into this and going back and forth. And ultimately, you might actually be able to write an essay about this. And sometimes, in a class, there's a question that you find interesting, and you have this idea that control is really the kind of essential point. What you might do is you might write a paper, you might explain the problem, explain how your view kind of handles all these different cases, and you might respond to some of the objections that that we've considered and that Prof. Pelzar and I have proposed. So that's kind of that's to give you a sense of what we might talk about. So there was another example, and if you want to stick around for a few minutes after time, we can talk about that. But yeah, basically, you know, I don't think we can settle this issue, but you know, if you have further thoughts on this, feel free to email me. And I guess, yeah, in just the last few minutes here, any questions that you have in general, maybe about philosophy at NUS, or any questions that you have, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and Prof. Pelzar and I will say something hopefully reasonable about them. Does a conclusion ever happen? And I take it that the person who asked this question, you're saying, like, do you ever solve one of these questions, or is it just, are we all just sort of like searching and we never really find the answer? And I think what I'd say just quickly, because I think this discussion we've had is actually a good example. I think it sounds like Yiting and Alex have a view that for them, it might be the conclusion that they're led to at this point in their thinking. And maybe, I mean, I don't know if maybe they've changed their mind, maybe they haven't, but they might well say for them, they have settled this question for themselves for now. And they've reached an answer that satisfies them. And so for them, that's a conclusion. Now, do we ever establish a conclusion where we say, this is the answer and everyone in the room must believe this is the answer? That doesn't happen so much in philosophy classes at NUS. I mean, maybe in some cases there's like a question about logic or something, and then there will be a right answer. But typically the really deep questions, it's rare that we would fully settle one of those, but you might have an answer and you might settle the question for yourself. And speaking as someone who studies philosophy, there are some questions I feel like I've settled for myself. So yes, a conclusion happens, but it's not the case that everyone in the world believes my conclusion. I have to convince them.
There's also a lot of like really bad answers that seem kind of tempting at first, and so we can sort of weed out some of the stuff that might have been distracting you, and so at least we can narrow things down to a smallish menu of options, and then have an intelligent conversation about those.
Very true. So two other questions. What are lessons like? I mean, a lesson might be the sort of thing we just did. This was a lesson. This was a little sneak peek of a lesson. Now, sometimes we'll involve reading an article that was written by a professional philosopher, and we'll sort of review the article carefully and go sort of paragraph by paragraph working through it. Other times there might be lessons where we break up into groups and have a debate. So there's a variety of different forms that lessons can take, but a lot of them just involve discussion of the type that we're having now. Is it difficult to do well in exams given how abstract and how many different perspectives and possibilities there are in philosophy? Or do we need to be able to defend and support our arguments? I would say the second question, yes, you need to be able to defend and support your arguments, but yes, it is difficult. And one thing at NUS, across the board, the way we do grades, there's about roughly a third of the class will get an A, and maybe half of the class will get a B, and a few members of, a small chunk of the class will get something lower. And that means that given the quality of students at NUS, that means a lot of people are, getting A's and B's, but not necessarily getting A pluses in every class. And so that's going to be true across the board at NUS. And so I don't know if philosophy, because of that, I don't know if philosophy is easier or harder. I think philosophy is really hard, but I think the students we have do it really well. Prof. Pelzar, do you know GET 1029? Is that the class you teach?
Yeah, that's the our kind of introductory module. Yeah, I'm not seeing any student questions in the chat, so I don't know.
Go to the Q&A. Go to there's a Q&A box. Which is
okay, Jess. Yeah, here we go. Yeah. So yeah, that GET 1029. It's kind of a whirlwind tour of philosophy. What I do is I pick about a dozen of my favorite philosophical topics, things that have very clear questions you can ask. So we ask things like, what is freedom of will? Do we have freedom of will even? If not, what are the implications? We ask questions like, well, what is consciousness? Are you just a bunch of atoms, or is there something in you sort of above and beyond that the natural sciences can't completely account for? We consider we look at kind of the future of technology and virtual reality, and so okay, it seems like we might get to a point where you could have fully immersive VR, and then this raises a question: well, how do you know that you're not in a virtual reality VR pod right now, and you just selected a really boring program, which is let's watch some NUS philosophers, but really you're some like 23rd century person who's just doing this kind of advanced kind of VR thing. How can we rule that out? Can we rule it out? If not, then what? Does God exist? That's a big one. We talk about that. We do a lot of ethic, moral philosophy, and political philosophy. Is there a difference between right and wrong? Some people think there's not. Nietzsche famously says that right and wrong are just kind of superstitions that are drilled into us from our youth, just to kind of like they're crowd control measures. Obviously, some people think that right and wrong are real and important. Political philosophy. What gives the government the right to force us to pay for stuff that we don't want? Does anything give them that right? So it's not every week in that module we're looking at a different topic. We try to set it up so that topics in adjacent weeks have some relevance to one another, but they're all nicely self-contained, so that if unfortunately one topic doesn't you don't love it, well then okay, it's not a dead loss. Then next week probably there'll be something of interest to you. So yeah, I mean, it's students seem to like it. We've been doing it this way for quite some time, and it is one thing for sure is that if you take that module and you really like it, then you should probably consider taking some more philosophy modules. But if you take the module and you really don't like it, then you should probably not take any more philosophy modules. So it's a good way of kind of dipping your toe into the water and seeing whether philosophy is your cup of tea.
Okay. All right, so we'll just quickly take these last few questions. Obviously, I think we were supposed to end at 3:45, so if you're heading somewhere else, you should just feel free to take off. And if you want to stay for these last few, yes.
Yeah, no, we'll go until like 3:55 latest. The next session is psychology at 4. Yeah, so please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. But yeah, so for those that are leaving, feel free. But some books you'd recommend to students who are planning to get into philosophy. I mean, for me, I think I would probably recommend something shorter than a book. Before for a philosophy book, a novel, if it's like a novel, sometimes you have to read 100 pages, 200 pages before you know whether you like it. But I think a philosophy book, like if you don't like it right away, then you should just stop reading it and read something else. And I think I could suggest some shorter pieces which are very interesting. And I would say just send me an email and I'll send some suggestions. I'm not prepared with a list of them right now. I don't know, Prof, if you have any.
Yeah, Tom Nagels, I'll type it in here. Wrote a short book called "What Does It All Mean," and that's a book, but it's a short one, and that is I mean it's kind of opinionated, but that's inevitable in philosophy. And if you want to kind of just get a glimpse into the sort of stuff we do, that might be one thing to look at.
yeah. I mean, you could read, there's a dialogue by Raymond Smullyan called Is God a Taoist? And it's really good. It's fun. Hi, Prof. What made you decide that philosophy was the right subject for you back in your undergrad days? I'll just answer this very quickly. I didn't know what I was doing. I was thinking of majoring in math. Math was really hard. I took a philosophy class kind of out of the blue randomly, and I ended up really liking it. And I kept taking more philosophy classes. And I think it was a combination of it really, like, the way of thinking that was being done in philosophy really like matched how I like to think about questions in general. And I thought it was really fun. And so, and I felt like I had ideas. I had, like, they weren't necessarily good ideas, but I had thoughts. I was like, oh, maybe this is the answer. Maybe this is the answer. And so it felt like, yeah, it felt like a good, other classes I wasn't as excited about, and philosophy seemed more interesting to me. So I'm someone who thinks a lot about these topics, but I realized I've been beginning to adopt a more nihilist view of the world. How do I prevent myself from slipping into and remaining in such rabbit holes? Prof,
Yeah, wait, first of all, what's wrong with nihilism? I mean, it's maybe that's the way to go. When it comes to ethics, I vacillate between a theory called utilitarianism, which just it's kind of results-based. Morality just says, well, the right thing to do is whatever is gonna like have the happiest results for everybody concerned, and a kind of a Nietzschean nihilistic view says, well, right and wrong, those are just kind of convenient myths, perhaps, or maybe inconvenient myths, as the case may be. So, yeah, but you can, but if by nihilism you're getting depressed, well, then maybe, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't study philosophy. It's depressing you. But I think if you take our modules, hopefully you'll find them enlivening, and they make you. That actually connects to this question. Well, how is philosophy relevant to our lives today? Well, one very immediate thing for me is that philosophy just makes life more fun. So I find that studying philosophy and learning to kind of think with a certain amount of clarity and systematicity and rigor about things, you can do it in daily life. You can read the newspaper, and if you have a background in philosophy, reading the newspaper is a much more interesting experience, I think, than for many people who aren't, because you recognize bad reasoning, sort of logical errors, and you develop an instinct to question not just kind of in an annoying kind of knee-jerk way, but in an intelligent way that's likely to get good results. So yeah.
I would also just add on to that question that one of the reasons I chose the topic that I chose for today, which is promising evidence, I was hoping that you would find that those questions, and when it's appropriate to make a promise, they are questions that do come up in real life. They're questions that we probably that we would encounter, and so it's interesting to think about questions that are that really arise in our ordinary lives, and so that was one of the reasons that that I chose that topic. And so hopefully that, yeah, I mean, maybe you'd ask, why should we think about whether it's okay to make a promise against the odds? But I'm hoping that many of you would find that is an interesting question, and it'll make me think harder about what promises I make. And is this something I really have control over? Am I really in a position to say that I'll be successful here? And if not, should I really make this promise? So thanks.
Okay, yeah. So we've I think cleared all the questions. There was one that I think Prof. Pelzer, you answered in text. So thanks everyone for joining us for this session, and thank you to the two profs for joining us and for spending their time with us. Okay, so we're going to round off this session, and we want to run a little poll for everyone who's here. So just to give us some feedback about the session, how you found it. So if you take some time to just answer that real quick, that would be great. Now, up next, of course, we have at 4 p.m., so that's in about 4 minutes' time, our session on psychology. And for that, I think Prof. Derbyshire is already here. Yes. Yeah, so we'll be starting that in about 4 minutes time. So, if you were here for the philosophy session, please go ahead and answer the poll. Yeah, for those of you who are here for the psychology session, welcome. And if you're staying on, yeah, please feel free to as well. In case you weren't aware already, there is a Q&A tab, so you can ask questions along the way as